Sarah looked out the rain-streaked window, her eyes catching on the old oak tree in the backyard. It had lost a large branch in last night's storm. She felt a strange affinity with that wounded tree. At 80 years old, Sarah too was weathered and weary, beaten down by life's relentless tempests. Her gaze drifted to the framed photo on the mantel. Her late husband David on their wedding day, grinning ear to ear, hope and promise alight in his eyes. Next to it sat a black and white picture of an elderly couple, hands intertwined, weathered faces creased with knowing smiles. Her parents on their 60th anniversary, a few months before they passed, just weeks apart. As if one couldn't bear to carry on without the other. The sight of those enduring loves, her guiding stars now dimmed, blurred behind a veil of tears. David had been gone 5 years now, but the ache of his absence still felt raw and unrelenting. Especially today, their anniversary. Sarah lost herself in memories of that crisp October day, 55 years ago. She was in a rush, running late for the train as usual. Hair still damp from the shower, coffee sloshing over the brim of the mug, toast clenched between her teeth as she fumbled to lock the front door. When she turned, she collided into a wall of suit-clad chest, her coffee splashing all over the stranger's white dress shirt. "I'm so sorry," Sarah stammered, frantically dabbing at the spreading stain with her crumpled napkin. The man chuckled. "I never liked this shirt anyway." Sarah looked up at his face and was met with the warmest hazel eyes she'd ever seen, crinkled at the corners from his amused smile. He had an unruly shock of chestnut hair that flopped boyishly over his forehead. "Let me pay for the dry cleaning at least," she offered. He waved away the suggestion. "No need. I'm David, by the way. I just moved into 4B.
I'm Sarah.
6A. Welcome to the building. Though I can't say the welcome I've given you so far is very neighborly." "Well, being accosted by beautiful women wielding dangerous coffee mugs is about as neighborly a welcome as a guy could hope for," he teased. She felt warmth flood her cheeks at his forward compliment. "I'd love to make it up to you properly. Perhaps over dinner sometime." Sarah heard herself proposing, uncharacteristically bold. His grin broadened. "I'd like that very much. How about tomorrow night?" The next evening, over cheap red wine and pasta at the little Italian bistro down the street, they talked and laughed for hours, oblivious to the bustle around them, lost in their own world. They marveled at how much they had in common, their conversation flowing effortlessly. He worked as a history teacher, she as a book editor. Both loved music, baseball, old movies, exploring the city. Both were hopeless romantics who believed in love at first sight. By the end of the night, they each knew with unshakable certainty that they had found their person. A year later, they were married. Through the decades, their love deepened, an intricate tapestry woven with thousands of tiny moments, slow dancing in the kitchen while the pasta boiled over, too enraptured with one another to notice. Racing hand in hand through the rain after getting caught in a sudden downpour without an umbrella, collapsing into fits of giddy laughter. Heated arguments that always ended with tearful apologies, fierce embraces, gentle kisses pressed to foreheads slick with fever, a silent language of knowing looks, a quirked eyebrow speaking volumes. They poured their love into everything they touched. Together, they transformed the dilapidated old house they scraped together every penny to buy into a warm cocoon. The air thick with the smell of Sarah's chocolate chip cookies, the walls humming with David's off-key crooning accompanied by his guitar. Everything intermingled, like they themselves had, his plaid shirts hanging next to her floral dresses, his historical biographies squeezed on the shelves between her dog-eared novels. Two lives knitted together, inextricable. It wasn't a perfect love. No such thing exists outside of fairy tales. There were long stretches when the monotony of the everyday took its toll, resentments festering beneath the surface. Times one felt invisible to the other, ships passing in the night. When tragedy came, a miscarriage, then the discovery that there would never be children. The grief drove a cold wedge between them, an impenetrable fortress of anger and sorrow they each retreated behind. But they always found their way back, with a touch, a word, a gesture, peace offering. an inside joke to pierce the tension. They remembered, again and again, that there's no one else they'd rather be in the trenches with, that their love was worth fighting for. They never took their bond for granted, expressing their love and appreciation in big and small ways, saying, "I love you," every day even when irritated with each other. Always going to bed angry, because they couldn't bear to let a day pass without the matter mended. Prioritizing tiny rituals, morning coffee together, a secret wink exchanged across a crowded room, grand romantic gestures, a surprise weekend trip, flowers for no reason, never failing to celebrate an anniversary or birthday, stealing kisses at stoplights, holding hands everywhere, even around the house while cooking, reading on the couch, falling asleep. As the years unspooled, their intimacy only grew richer. They held nothing back from one another, sharing every hope, dream, fear, and insecurity, revealing the most vulnerable, unlovely parts of themselves. When David's father died suddenly, Sarah held him as he sobbed with abandon, his face buried in her neck as his tears soaked her sweater. When Sarah fell into a depression after being passed over yet again for a promotion, David coaxed her out of despair with bottomless patience and tenderness. They were each other's safe harbor. Even as age weathered their bodies, their bond remained supple and strong. Gray hair and creaky joints did nothing to dim their love's luster. They reveled in their inside jokes known only to them, a secret language 50 years in the making. They dissolve into fits of giggles like misbehaving schoolchildren. To their nieces and nephews bemused delight and eye rolls. All of Sarah's most treasured memories were suffused with David's presence beside her like a steadfast heartbeat. She could scarcely untangle the strands of her life from his. Even the most ordinary days were rendered precious simply because they contained him. Lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper and fighting over the crossword. Hazy, humid evenings catching fireflies with mason jars in the backyard. Riotous Thanksgiving dinners crowded around the too-small table, elbows bumping as they passed platters. His love had been her North Star, her guiding light, the axis her world spun upon. Without him, she felt unmoored, adrift, the bed too big, the house too quiet, his absence like a constant dull ache. Their two lives so entwined it was as if a vital organ had been ripped from her body. Sometimes she'd find herself calling his name from another room out of sheer habit before remembering with a sickening lurch that he was gone. She still held one-sided conversations with him each night as she climbed into their bed alone. She'd tell him about her day, her latest baking experiment, the deer that nibbled at the tomato plants he'd always complained about them devouring. She could still hear his voice as clearly as if he were lying right there beside her, scoffing that he told her she should have built a taller fence. Even in those excruciating final weeks as the cancer ravaged his body, their love remained a force of nature, unwavering, indestructible. The nurse said she'd never seen a patient continue to joke and radiate such joy through the worst of the pain. When David could no longer speak, they communicated in a touch, a look, their fluency in the wordless language of their own world undiminished. Sarah rarely left his side, curling her body around his bony frame, wanting her love to blanket him, a balm to soothe his suffering. Age had taught David that the world was a cold, chaotic place that would pummel you without mercy. There was little justice or meaning to be found. But he also learned that love, real love, was a kind of magic that rendered the cruelties bearable. Love couldn't protect you from loss or pain, but it could save you in a deeper sense. When he looked back on his life, he couldn't recall the career accolades or material things acquired. It was all reduced to ashes compared to the treasure of loving Sarah for over half a century. Loving her had redeemed everything, made every moment sacred, imbued his existence with profound meaning and beauty. In the end, that love was all that mattered. It was the only thing death couldn't take from him. As his eyes fluttered closed for the final time, her cherished face hovering over him, he felt only peace and gratitude. Their love was his salvation, the richest blessing. Sarah cradled his still hands in hers, tears dripping down onto their intertwined fingers. "Wait for me. I'll be with you soon," she whispered. After his death, she felt his presence everywhere. In the waft of his cologne that still clung to his shirts hanging in the closet, as if he might walk in any moment, looking for the blue-striped one she'd given him last Father's Day. Even though they had no children, it was their running joke, a Father's Day gift from her to him each year. She felt him in the whispering of the wind through the oak's leaves as she sat in the garden, in the burbling of the coffee pot each morning, in the muted golden sunlight that slanted across their bed. The first year was a numb blur. She functioned on autopilot, simply going through the motions. Over time, the grief became less of a crushing weight, more of a bittersweet ache, as memories of their beautiful life together edged out the sorrow. She came to see that the pain of losing him was proportional to the momentous gift of loving him, two sides of the same coin. A love less great would hurt less to lose, but she wouldn't trade a moment of their time together, the blinding joy or the searing heartache. She'd choose that love story again and again in 100 different lifetimes. As she thought back on their humble beginnings, a happenstance meeting, a ruined shirt, a dinner that turned into forever, Sarah marveled at the mystery of it. How random twists of fate, innocuous encounters, could alter the entire trajectory of a life. It seemed impossible that she could have so easily never met David, that she could have hurried out the door 5 minutes later that day and they would have forever remained strangers. The finality of that thought made her shudder, the horrifying prospect of a life untouched by his love. There were still moments the longing for him would seize her by the throat without warning. But as time went on, the sweet gradually eclipsed the bitter. She could smile wistfully at old photos without tears springing to her eyes, laugh out loud replaying his wild bedtime stories he'd act out complete with silly voices, sit in his worn leather armchair with her cheek resting on the headrest and feel his essence there, a comforting presence. For years after he passed, Sarah was diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer. She eschewed treatment, accepting the prognosis with equanimity. After 80 years and a love that most could only dream of, she was content, at peace. She was ready to return to him. Those final months, she set about writing their love story, determined to capture their tale for posterity before it was lost to time. Each night, she sat at the old roll-top desk, tendrils of wispy hair backlit by the soft glow of the lamp, hunched over the lined paper. Her shaky, arthritic fingers struggled to keep up with the rush of memories as she poured their saga onto the page. Every cherished detail, inside joke, quiet moment and grand gesture memorialized in ink. It was both a memoir and a love letter, a celebration of their once-in-a-lifetime connection and a mourning of a world without him in it. One unseasonably warm evening in late October, Sarah slipped away in her sleep, David's blue striped shirt clutched to her heart. She left behind neatly stacked piles of papers on the desk, the last lines penned just hours before her death. Ours was a love that knew no bounds or circumstance, remarkable in its purity, steadfastness, and tenacity. A love that transformed the ordinary into the sacred. In the end, that is the measure of a life well lived, not in achievements or acquisitions, but in a love deeply felt and generously shared. For over 50 years, we walked through this world hand in hand, twin souls. Loving him with abandon, and being loved by him in equal measure, was the greatest privilege, blessing, and joy of my life. As I go to meet him now, my only wish is that everyone could experience a love like ours, for even just a day.